Thank you, gentlemen. Now, I'd like to present our guest speaker, who is a fellow brother in arms and a current student veteran here at Nichols University. He and I shared some of the same sand overseas, though it was at different times. I'm a little bit older. I would still like, at this time, introduce U.S. Marine Corps veteran, Mr. Corporal Fryer.
Yay, John!
Good morning. Good morning. Thank all of you for attending today. Taking time out of your day to attend this tribute to veterans is without doubt noticed and widely appreciated. I'd also like to show my appreciation to Nichols State University for having me here today. I'm truly honored. And I'd also like to show thanks and recognition to the older generation of veterans, because although I'm a veteran myself, I would not have had the opportunity to serve if it would not have been for them paving the way. So at this moment, I'd like to give a round of applause to the older generation of veterans paving the way for veterans today. I have two sons. One is 5 years old and one is 3. Last night, I was talking to my son about a performance that was coming up this morning, hosted by his school for Veterans Day. The children were going to sing a song in USA to celebrate and give tributes to veterans. As I was talking to my son last night, I asked him if he knew what a veteran was. And his answer was no, that he didn't. Now, my son's 5. If you ask him if his dad was a Marine, he'll tell you yes. And when he was 2, if you asked him what his dad did, he would say, boom, boom. So I asked him if he wanted me to explain to him what a veteran was. And he said yes. And surprisingly, I immediately found myself actually at a loss for words on how to explain who a veteran was to a 5-year-old. Now, don't make me laugh when I say this, but the first thing that came to mind, I said to my 5-year-old is, veterans are like the old Power Rangers who aren't active anymore and appear in the TV shows. So, after I laughed at my explanation myself, I began to elaborate a little more to my son on who a veteran actually was. And it was in that exchange, the reason I told you that, is that in that exchange I realized exactly what I want to talk about here today. Every Veterans Day, we very frequently talk about celebrating veterans and acknowledging their service and their sacrifice, and never forgetting for a moment what they have done for this country and what they allow us to do. But not too often do we stop and take time to actually think about who a veteran is. Everybody knows what makes a veteran a veteran. We all know that a veteran is somebody who has served for the United States military at some point. But that only really explains the title that we bear and why we bear it. It doesn't give a lot of meaning to who we are as veterans, as to what really separates us. And that's what I'd like to do here today. I'd like to talk about a couple of different aspects that are common to all veterans. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a little bit more insight to when you see a veteran and you're thanking him for his service or her service, you'll have a little bit more insight into exactly what that veteran went through. I'm going to talk about one aspect of why we joined, the decision that led to us becoming veterans. I'm going to talk about the experience that we had inside the military, and then I'm going to talk about the decision after we left the military and transitioning from active duty member to veteran, from soldier to civilian. One of the most common questions that I get asked, and I hear others asked, is why we decided to sign up. There are a lot of different reasons. And depending on who you ask, you may get a different one, whether you talk to a reservist or active duty personnel and veterans alike, as to why they made the decision to sign the papers and take the oath to defend this country. Of all the answers I've heard a few a bit more common than others. The recent attacks on September 1911 was a primary reason for a lot of veterans who joined the military to fight for their country. Many of them lost loved ones or knew someone who did, and merely had an urge to fight back and protect this country that was severely attacked and wounded. Another reason that I hear a lot is that people had an urge to serve. That when this country was in need, and had a great call for its citizens to step up and answer the call. They wanted to be one of those who was answering that call and who was also alongside people who was already in the military, fighting overseas and doing what they could to help. A third reason is that some people merely felt it was a calling. Some people have a gut feeling in their lives as they're growing up that they were born to be athletes, others to be doctors, some engineers, chefs, teachers. And some have a gut feeling that they were born to be warriors, to be protectors. And what I mean by that is that some of us felt like we were born to take up the call for arms so others don't have to face an enemy so others don't have to. We feel like it is who we are to protect others and in our nature, including each other on the battlefield. This particular feeling and reason is what led me to my enlistment. Now that I've explained some of the reasons why we all join, I can tell you about the experience that we all have inside the military. A lot of people like to ask about Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Korea, Europe in World War II and 1. Everybody's experience overseas is different. And so I'll limit my words to my experience and the brothers that I served with overseas in Iraq. I served 2 combat tours to the Fallujah area in the Al-Anbar province in Iraq. Training for Iraq became our life. It had to. Everything we were learning was going to save our lives and those around us overseas. Once you were overseas, something that a lot of people are not so much aware of is that when you are overseas, that's it. The mind has to be 100% focused on where it's at. Personal problems back home have to be shut off. They can cloud the mind and consume your thoughts and risk the lives of everybody around you, including yourself. Of course, this task is beyond difficult. The very thing that you're fighting so hard to come home to and the very thing you're fighting to protect, you almost have to block out and focus completely on where you're at. It would all be but impossible if it wasn't for your brothers. Because the same commitment you have to come back home, you have the same level of commitment to your brothers that you will not let down. That's another aspect that veterans all share, is the brotherhood that is formed between those who fight alongside each other overseas. Words cannot begin to describe this bond. There's something about a bond that is formed when you're putting your life in the hands of somebody else on an incredibly steady basis that is different from every other bond in this world. I have an entire list of brothers of whom I would put my life in their hands. There is literally no limit to how far you would go for each other. And that commitment keeps your mind focused overseas and keeps you steady on doing the task at hand so you can bring each other home. This doesn't end overseas. This transfers right over when it's time to come home and lay our rifles down and greet our anxiously awaited families that we've been waiting so long to see. Which brings up another point, the toll taken on families, another aspect that all veterans can relate to. The toll taken on families is tremendous and also beyond words. Even when we are stateside, we are gone, depending on your job, about 75% of the time training for the next deployment. Of the remaining 25%, even still only a fraction is spent with your families, especially if you live in the barracks and you live on base and your family is back home in your hometown, because the extended time period needed to travel home and spend with your families is rare due to the heavy workload that is needed for the deployment coming up. Needless to say, there are a lot of things to consider when it comes times for re-enlistment. Many of us, for different reasons, leave the military and come back home. This is a time where transition begins. For those of us that decided to leave the military, we hear the question quite often, why didn't you stay in? When we talk about how much we loved it and how the love to serve this country is no greater thing. The list for this is incredibly long, so I'll also share my own as an example. For me, it was simple. My sons are here. My family is here. And I had a choice, and I chose my sons. After I served and my sons were born, I didn't want to miss anything else. I missed my first son being born in Iraq, and I almost missed my second due to our workout for Afghanistan. As one of my personal close best friends was medically discharged after it was discovered by mere accident that he had internal cranial swelling, which if not caught, would have probably led to his death within 10 years. Some suffer from injuries also that are not so visual. Some suffer from extreme cases of PTSD and are forever changed by the events they've witnessed overseas. After we are out and have returned home, we face the challenge of re-entering civilian life. Except there's one problem that took me years to overcome and to sort it out, and to some extent I'm still working on. One simply never goes back to how they were before they were in the military. They never simply go back to being the civilian they were beforehand. The experience that we've undergone has changed us forever. There was a struggle at first in our identity between veteran and civilian. What we did has actually become a part of us, or rather defined us, than just become a part of us. The change we go through in the military is so mentally strong that it's irremovable. For the first 6 months after I came home, if you walked into my apartment, all you would see is a couch, a TV, a dresser, and a bed in my bedroom, and literally every single piece of gear that I had left over from the Marine Corps. Most of my personal things were in storage, and all that mattered to me, honestly, was that I had a place to sleep and my gear next to me. It took my family coming over to recognize that having my gear out and not being able to sort of let go and move on to the new position I was in my life for me to actually start to make the transition into being a civilian. And I didn't even realize it. The struggle into civilian life is extremely difficult for everyone. At first, everywhere you go, you tend to feel segregated. There's a feeling of difference, almost as if you don't belong or rather belong somewhere else and you're not there anymore. There's a feeling of something left undone that you could have done more. But sometimes there are precious little things here that need our attention. This feeling can sometimes lead to serious depression and loneliness, two of the things that veterans out there face every day. If you consider the decisions that veterans made that led them to where they are, the experiences they endured, and the transition they underwent from warrior to civilian, you will have a much better insight and understanding as to who veterans are. I have told you a bit of my story. I'd like to challenge each one of you today as you come across a veteran and thank them for their service, to find out a bit of their story, to find out who they are and what they've done. And in closing, I'd like to leave you with a misunderstanding that I also hear a lot. A lot of people have different opinions on the wars that have been fought by this country. And some of them don't necessarily agree. And so sometimes we're asked the question, why did we fight for something that this person didn't agree in? Why did we fight for decisions that were made that the U.S. didn't agree with, or personally they didn't agree with, or a whole long list of things? And my answer has always been to that, and I'm pretty sure if you're asking a veteran, he'll tell you the same thing. We didn't fight for anybody in a black and white suit, and we didn't fight for anybody who made those decisions. What we primarily fought for was America. And what America is not the government. America is what's standing right here in front of me. America is the people, and the people are represented by a government. You are what we fought for, and we are proud to have served you and would do it again, without hesitation, without question. That is what it means to be a veteran. Thank you all, and happy Veterans Day.
Thank you, John. Everything you said actually hits home. It's funny how we can all be so very different, but when you put on a pair of boots, we are pretty much all the same, no matter what branch we're coming from. And again, I thank you for that. and I know you brought some of your gear here. So if any of you are interested in after the program to come up, talk to John, and he can show you his equipment. He served in Iraq, and this is the equipment that he wore when he was there. So at this time, I asked the Max Charger students to come up. I think we have their class president, if I'm not mistaken.